Afternoon. I'd like to thank everyone who came on time, and we are going to start in 4 minutes.
Okay, so FYI, parish.
Good afternoon, everyone. I thank you for being here today and for being on time, and I welcome you to the quarterly meeting of the New Orleans City Council Transportation Committee meeting. The committee can meet as necessary. Our meetings are scheduled on a quarterly basis, and we do interface with the Regional Transit Authority and the Aviation Board Committee, so a lot of business is done through there that doesn't necessarily have to be done here, but we have a quarterly meeting, and I invite everyone to join us at those meetings. So at this time, we'll do roll call.
Roll call, we have Councilmember Green,
Present.
Councilmember Moreno, Councilmember Jeruso,
Here.
Councilmember Harris. Here. Councilmember Green, I'm sorry, King, we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a quorum. May I entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting of May 8th, 2023? Moved by Councilman Jeruso, seconded by Councilmember Moreno. If the machines come up, please vote your machine so it's official. If not, there being no opposition, we'll move forward with the approval of the minutes. At this time, we have a presentation relative to Councilmember Harris's ordinance by request number 34378. We have two presenters, Mr. Todd James and Mr. Jeff Schwartz. If you all will take a place at the table and introduce yourselves to the public.
Full screen the incoming. This works? Yes, I hope so.
There we go. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, council members. And so Todd James with Broadmoor, but I'm here as a representative, a part of the River District Neighborhood Investors Development Team, and gonna work hand in hand with my buddy Jeff Schwartz here on what we've been able to work through as a part of this CEA package.
Thank you. I'll take it over from here.
Sorry.
Y'all have a presentation to show us?
Yes.
All right. Please proceed.
Great. Thank you, council members. Just to introduce myself, Jeff Schwartz, Director of the Office of Economic Development for Mayor Cantrell. Yeah, I think we're at an exciting point where we are seeing forward movement with the River District project, which we all know has been a long time coming. I'm going to turn it over to Todd to walk through a number of sort of the details of the project and some updates. But I think big picture, to not bury any of the lead here, the city has a CEA with the convention center that dates to 2016. It was originally designed to deal with traffic impacts related to Convention Center Boulevard and surrounding projects. And the Cooperative Endeavor Agreement amendment that we're here to present on today is an amendment. It's actually the second amendment to that agreement, and it is here to essentially expand the boundaries that these funds can be expended on in order to support the additional investment that's going to be happening around the River District. So we can get more into the details of the agreement, but I think it's helpful to have Todd go over sort of the proposal at hand.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Jeff. And just want to give you all an opportunity to just give you a brief update on where we are with River District as a development, and then delve deeper into the benefit components of why we are requesting this amendment to the CEA. So of course, we've presented this back to the council back in, I want to say January, when we did the text amendment for the overall development. So of course, our team still remains the same with a heavy influence of equitable partnerships that's been established by the long list of companies that you see listed on the screen right here. And of course, so some of the familiar faces with this project, of course, under the leadership of our development team, Louis Larcella, Chris McGuire with Cypress Equities, Tara Hernandez on behalf of JCH Properties Plus, Brian Gibbs, Michael Meredith with VPG, who's actually here in attendance, Nicole Weber with Weber Consulting, and Sean Barney with Smith & Porter. We still have our same construction affiliates with Gibbs Construction, as well as Broadmoor and Bow Brothers. And we still have the continued project management roles that is led by Cypress Gensler, as well as myself on the infrastructure side. So just touching back on how we came up with the initial master plan process, a big part of what we wanted to do is respect the rich history of what we have within what was historically known as the Cotton District. But we are coming back with a different package to help reestablish some of the initial street grid that was in this area prior to it being removed over some time. So when we got into the master planning process, we still wanted to focus on the 4 key parameters of what was important to the success of the district. One, of course, being public open space, the establishment of a district-based stormwater management system, a heavy focus on affordable and workforce housing, as well as mixed-use neighborhood development parameters. So a big package of what we've been focused on within our infrastructure focus has been concepts of district energy, where we've been in continued conversations with Centrio as well as Entergy, pushing for a smart cities digital infrastructure package, and a heavy push with RTA to figure out how to introduce multimodal components inside the development and around the district, especially with a push towards what they've been proposing with the bus rapid transit system. So a heavy focus back to the smart cities digital infrastructure package for us. What we're trying to do is help to increase the general experience of anyone who may visit the River District, as well as the convention center area. So through this collaborative process, we're starting to work through how we can introduce fiber into the overall district itself, with some benefits of a higher broadband capacity for anyone who may live within the district or visit the area on a day-to-day basis. So what you see here is an updated master plan image, which shows everything within River District right now. As everyone is aware, one of the first phases that we have coming in, which is on the lakeside of Tchoupitoulas, is the Topgolf project. But we do have a heavy focus on what was spelled out as a part of our initial package. The heavy focus on affordable and workforce housing, which you do see in what we refer to as parcels 5 and 6. We are heavily focused on the office tower project that we hope to have some good news coming forward in the next couple months on that deal. And one project that is still advancing at a pretty good rate is the Market Street Power Station. While it's not part of the River District site and development team, some of our partner entities are part of the partnership team have acquired that property and are advancing that project at a pretty good pace. So just to give you a quick snapshot, this is some of the furtherance of how we've continued the design package. This is a heavy focus on parcels 5 and 6, which is our mixed income and affordable housing. And what you do see in front is still the continuation of that linear park concept that we've talked about from time and time again, where we're going to have a heavy focus on our stormwater management package and the focus of a public open space. Second image is some of the latest renderings on Market Street's facade. That is still a continuation that may be somewhere in an area of roughly 200,000 square feet of potential mixed use opportunities within that site. Topgolf, as I mentioned earlier, has advanced pretty far through in their due diligence process. And what you see before you is actually some of the revised renderings of how this package has evolved quite a bit to make sure it's entrenched in the neighborhood and reflects what is the appropriate design aesthetic, with a heavy focus of what you see in the front of this image is actually a pocket park at the entrance at the corner of U-Turf and Chapatulas to help us reinforce how we're going to deal with our pedestrian connectivity from River District into that site crossing that major thoroughfare. This next image is a focus on what you see on proposed Convention Center Boulevard, which we refer to as Parcel 2. This is roughly 125 to 130,000 square foot office tower that we're still working through that development package to help add a second anchor component to how we further the development of this site. So the bigger question is, we're here to really discuss the CEA and amendment proposal that's in front of the council now. And I want to make sure we focus on 4 key parts of how we think this CEA amendment is to the benefit of the whole. So one is with the expanded boundaries of what's the qualified area of where these funds would be expended. The second point is a traffic mitigation plan process. We have our engineers moving us along quite a bit right now, that we're in the process of getting ready to queue up our second round of stakeholder meetings with everybody that's within the area, as well as all other vested parties. And that's where you see the stakeholder engagement. And the last part is an alignment between not just River District, but the city's infrastructure plan, as well as improvements on site. So what you see on the map before you right now is that CEA exhibit, which has been provided in the document. What you see outlined in blue was the last iteration of the boundary, which was limited to majority of the warehouse district. With the current CEA proposed amendment, we are now expanding the footprint over to Orange Street, so we could have a heavier focus on how to improve traffic around the site, not just for River District, but for everyone who's inside this area. So coming back to that stakeholder engagement, we've been having meetings with folks over the past year, and like I mentioned, planning the next round of stakeholder engagement, where of course the Convention Center, Port of New Orleans, the various departments within the city of New Orleans, DOTD, Sewage and Water Board, of course, River District, RTA, and Tulane University as a riparian rights owner adjacent to the site will all have an opportunity to comment on how we will be able to coordinate and manage traffic coming into the district. So some of the key elements, what you see right here is one of our initial traffic mapping plans that we had been studying for quite some time. With this CEA, this helps us to further the gap on how to improve some of the traffic planning that's around the site. You're going to see some reference to what we've proposed as an S curve, which at South Peter Street, which allows for the truck traffic on Chapatulas to connect in a much more seamless way onto U-Turf and up onto elevated US 90, which we hope in the end helps to improve traffic flow, not just for us, but for the port. This other image is one thing that we've been working on quite a bit in the background with RTA. This is one of our concept plans where we're going to be able to move and expand where bus rapid transit can actually come into River District and have 2 key stops, one at the public park outside of our affordable and mixed income housing, as well as how it connects back in front of some of the larger venues that we anticipate to plan around the convention center. This gives you some street sections of how we would introduce those dedicated bus rapid transit lanes, particularly on Convention Center Boulevard, as well as on Race and U-Turf streets, which has a dedicated center lane to help mitigate how the bus traffic would move and flow with all the other vehicles coming within the site. So in a nutshell, the key part to this is how we build a better New Orleans neighborhood. This is with the help of the CEA, this helps us to expand on the already $26 million in funds that the convention center has set aside to pay for infrastructure within the district. Now we can take these dollars and improve the traffic flow on the perimeter of the district. That was the area that was not necessarily intended to be impacted, but we understood for the better value of River District to move forward, we needed to look well beyond just our general footprint and figure out how to help better partner and manage traffic flow so that we could have a better project.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you working closely with my office on River District. I can tell you I was skeptical at first, but because of you and your team and the outreach that you've done, I really am super excited about this project, especially the affordable housing and mixed use housing that's going to come because of this. Councilmember Moreno.
Thank you. I just have some questions about the actual CEA. It looks like on page 4 of 9 of the CEA, it talks about disbursements. Can you explain to me the escrow account? I guess it's got $6.4 million in it, and I guess y'all are taking that money. So explain to me, what's the escrow money? How did it come about?
Sure.
And then obviously the utilization of that 6.4 million.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilmember. I'll start, Todd. You can kick me under the table. So yes, so this is an agreement from 2016. The convention center under that original agreement placed $12.5 million into an escrow account that the city controlled. And it was designed to mitigate the impacts associated with the Convention Center Boulevard narrowing project, which has since been completed a number of years ago. As a result of that, there were two funds in escrow. That $12.5 million was split into two buckets. One was $6.1 million for other direct traffic improvements with Convention Center, and then the other was $6.4 million designed to essentially mitigate traffic impacts in and around the Convention Center. And so it's an essential point, and I'm glad you asked the question, Council Member. The original intent of these funds was to mitigate traffic impacts in the adjacent areas surrounding the Convention Center. I think the most succinct way to summarize what happened is that a lot of the negative impacts didn't materialize. The Department of Public Works has kept, constant sort of eyes on how traffic is flowing around there. We're aware that certainly on Chapatulas and when there's cruise ship traffic and the like, there can be some pinch points. But for the intention of these funds that were placed in escrow, a lot of those mitigation projects were either deemed unnecessary or could be scaled down. And so in working with the Department of Public Works, with their former and current leadership, Alan Bureau obviously left as chief traffic engineer a couple of months ago. We basically looked at this and said, there's going to be at most about $1.5 million of projects that we would like to hold back those funds for the original purpose, right? In that original geography. And then we are saying that with this expanded geography, with a project that achieves a lot of the public benefits that we'd like to see in the form of job creation, affordable housing, public transit improvements, et cetera, that these funds can go to mitigate some of the traffic impacts that are going to be in this expanded geography with the River District. And so what the CEA does is essentially splits that $6.4 million into two buckets. One that's $1.5 million that the city reserves direct control over in terms of how we prioritize the expenditure of those funds. And then the remainder, the $4.9 million, is able to go directly into the larger geography, the River District's geography that Todd just outlined.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Jeff. We have 3 public comments. The first is Michael Sawaya. And just a reminder, 2 minutes. And Anita, do we have any online comments? Okay, perfect.
Good afternoon, council members. Thank you. I mean, it's been just a little over 2 years since we selected our DNI, and getting to this point where we're actually talking about traffic, we can visualize development and how it's going to benefit the city. A lot of time and effort has been put forward in engaging the neighbors around there, so everyone is at the table and has input. Not an easy task, as you can imagine, but we've gotten to a point where we believe that there's a plan that works. And it's the first step, really, the last condition precedent on getting shovels in the ground in the development area. So thank you, Councilwoman Harris, for all the cooperation in your office and your support on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. David Phelps. And just a reminder, please state your name and whether or not you are representing anyone before you speak. David, you don't want to speak, but you're in support. Lee Bailey.
Hello. So my name is Leah Bailey and I'm with Unite Here Local 23, the Union for Hospitality Workers in our city. And I just want to go on record and oppose the amendment to the ordinance as it is right now, because number one, I and the rest of the public have not had a chance to review this amendment and to the CEA. And we feel like it's important for the public to be able to kind of take their time and look at this and see if them, the stakeholders, are okay with it. I think this is a very, very large development, something that the city has not done in a very long time. And we owe it to people in the public to be able to kind of look at this. In addition, like I said, we urge publicizing these documents in advance of the public comment. I know that, the law is that we don't have to put everything out 24 hours in advance, but let's do better. And with important things, be able to kind of show people what's going on, especially when it's involving public money.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Michael Meredith.
I just want to make sure I say, I make a motion to defer. Bye.
No.
Good afternoon. I'll be brief. I think, Todd and his team, internal to us, Michael Meredith with RD and I, one of the equity investors there. Todd and his team have had a difficult job in trying to figure out this traffic issue and, how it affects us as a developer is really our competitiveness across the state. We're going to be competing for affordable housing dollars with tons of developers all across Louisiana, and things that are happening in the CEA make us, 2 to 3 times more competitive with rapid transit, with access. And so we see this as a huge piece, but also as our leasing team, as we attract businesses, those are usually the first questions that we ask, especially as they ride around the neighborhood. They see all of the port traffic. They say, how are we going to move people here? So, these things are not minute in the bigger scheme of things of what we're dealing with when we're talking about economic development and most importantly, our affordable housing. I head up our application period piece of our deal, and that's at least two check boxes on that is how competitive we are as far as traffic, rapid transit, and access to public transportation for our citizens in this neighborhood specifically. So I just wanted to speak on support of this and look forward to continue working with y'all moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you to Todd and Jeff for making the presentation here today. We'll be voting on this on Thursday at the next council meeting. So there will be time to take a look at the CEA, Ms. Bailey. And then again, we'll vote on it next Thursday. Listen, this is going to be a model, I think, for density as a creator of affordable and mixed use housing. And again, I'm super excited for it. I do want to say, y'all need to continue to engage the neighbors and the neighborhood. I know you have, but as we move forward with this, I think those meetings are critical to making sure that we're socializing this properly.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you.
Councilmember Green.
Yes. I just wanted to say I'm very impressed with the amount of planning that's gone in and the agencies that are involved. I kind of want to put my plug in for the diversity of the development team. Very pleased to see that happen. I appreciate VPG, JHC, Todd, James, and others involved. And it's a testament to, especially when this development takes place, of what can be done in our city when there's expansion of the planning that involves those who might not have been involved in the past, if you will. I'm trying to use my words correctly. The bottom line is that opportunities are available. And this is an example of a project that's going to go well with the diversity of the development team, which is what is a testament to its success. So thank you very much. Appreciate your work. Appreciate your work, Ms. Meredith.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. We're gonna go a little bit out of order. I appreciate the fact that the Department of Public Works is here in the interest of making sure that we have our members present. We're gonna move to item number 5, which is an update on the RTA's capital projects by Ms. Catherine Bush Felton, the RTA Chief of Staff, and Dwight Norton, the RTA Interim Chief of Planning and Capital Projects. Please come forward. Hey. Again, for the public, we're on item number 5 on the agenda.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Could you identify yourself so the public say?
All righty, thank you for having us. And I also want to acknowledge our board chair, Mark Raymond, who is here on separate business. We want to make sure that we take the time to acknowledge him.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm here for our CEO, Lona Hankins, who is out of the office today.
Miss Felton, it's very hard to hear you.
Usually people say I'm loud. So I was just acknowledging our commissioner and letting the council know that I'm here on our CEO's behalf with Dwight Norton. As you all know, last week we celebrated the opening of our $43.5 million Now Street Ferry Terminal, which is very exciting for us. It's one of our first capital projects in a very long time. And I actually want to say as a newer staff at the RTA, I don't know if folks in this room realize this, but when I started, the FTA was on the verge of taking the money back for this project. It was only through Lona's leadership when she came on that she was able to turn that project around. And now we have a beautiful facility for us all to have. Next, on September 10th, we are instituting our fall service change. I think a lot of you will be excited about the changes to the 55. We are reinstating service to Congress Street, or Congress Drive, I'm sorry, from Perth Street. The bus will turn on Haynes to Congress and we'll do the loop. So we're hoping that people in Pontchartrain Park will be happy with this. And we have our outreach team is going to go out and have a community meeting in the area and make sure that everyone is aware of this positive change. Also, the 31 and 32 are going to be extended to Children's Hospital. And I just want to go over some recent funding announcements. You all may be aware of this, but since we haven't been here for most of the summer, I want to talk about our $71 million LOVNO award, which is also very exciting. We're going to get 20 new electric buses, microgrid, and depot chargers. And the exciting part of this project is the workforce development that's needed, the training that we'll be able to train New Orleans residents to work on this new technology so that we can create additional pathways of the future for employment. We also were awarded $24.8 million for the Downtown Transit Center, and Dwight will talk more about these projects a little bit later. And we got a $10.5 million appropriation from the state to continue ferry service next year. And we're happy to report that we're working with council and the mayor to figure out the last $3 million that we need for next year. So we're pretty optimistic that's gonna work itself out. And I will just transition over to Dwight, who will give some more updates on some of our capital projects.
Thank you and good afternoon. Speaking of the big award, this was the 5th largest award in the country for the accelerating the conversion of transit fleets to electric, to zero and no emission. We're extremely excited and honored about this big prize. This is a continuation of the work that we've already started. So we have a pilot program underway that's going to have our first 3 electric buses. That was awarded a couple of years ago and has been working its way through our implementation phase. And we expect those pilot buses to launch in 2025. That's going to set us up for this massive expansion, what we're calling kind of our resilient zero emission fleet. Because as Catherine said, this isn't just the electric buses, but it's all the infrastructure that goes along with it. And not just in the infrastructure just for charging, but what we asked for was we need to be able to charge when we have power disruptions in our community, because we know that's a huge part of the reality of living in this area. And so that 5 megawatt microgrid means we'll be able to charge these buses even if we don't have reliable power, or we have a power disruption due to storms or other major events. And that's going to be key for us to be able to expand and convert our fleet into these zero emission technologies. And again, as we said, the workforce development can't be understated. We're really excited. We have a partnership opportunity. We're working with Delgado, Suno, the union, and IBEW, all part of the training to help on both the fleet and the facilities of the future. We expect these vehicles to be in service in about late 2026 is by the time we get everything all through our process and our infrastructure built. Rampart streetcar restoration, some more immediate underway. Construction has started. We anticipate the work to be completed by the end of this year, and the streetcars to be back rolling on the street as shown in January of next year. Again, just as a reminder, this was a result of the Hard Rock Hotel collapse, which wiped out a whole section of the power systems of the overhead wires and several poles. And that's the work that's right underway right now in downtown, is getting those poles reinstalled so that we can then get the wires all set up. The Downtown Transit Center. Again, this is a really exciting project award that came just earlier this year in partnership with the City of New Orleans, who is our named partner. And we're going to be working very much collaboratively on this project. This is approximately about a $26 million facility on the site of the old Southern Railways Terminal, which has been in its current state at the bottom right picture there for about 60, 70 years. But beforehand, for the first half of the 20th century, it was a transportation facility and that whole corridor that connected it. I don't expect it to look like that. That was a Daniel Burnham design building, but it is going to be something that the community can be very proud of. We want this to be, this is our flagship passenger facility, and we will going to be working closely with the community and all of our stakeholders to make sure that this really is a beacon of public infrastructure. It really sets the tone for how great transit is and can be in our community and the world. Design is going to be starting later this year, and we expect construction to start in early 2025. Possibly sooner if we can move things along, but we want to provide some realistic estimates. We're working right now with the city to get our solicitations. We'll be putting out advertisements for a design team to get underway shortly. The next big passenger amenity facility we're working on is the other side of the river. Now that we've cut the ribbon on one side of the river, we're working on the renovation of the terminal on the other side of the river in Algiers Point. This is a $9.6 million project to renovate this area and really, convert it from its present state, which was designed more for car ferries and really kind of disconnected. You've got the Algiers levee path that runs along there that kind of just ends abruptly, and really turn this into a really great amenity for the community in the point in this area. Looking at how we're going to convert that building, add some administrative offices on the second floor, but then looking at how we can create the main floor as some kind of program opportunity, whether that's a concession or it's event space or some kind of opportunity. That's something we're going to be working very closely with the council member's office, with our community to understand what are the needs and preferences to go into that facility from the beginning of our design process, which we'll be kicking off in October or November of this year. And that'll be the first phase of our process, is really understanding what it is that community wants to see out of this and how do we deliver as much as we can with the budget we have available. We would anticipate the completion around October of 2025. We are also working on another partnership with the city in the conversion of the second floor of the Union Passenger Terminal to be administrative offices for RTA. This is actually something that's been kicked around as an idea since the beginning of RTA, founding in 1983. This idea of really converging our different transportation modes all together. So we're really excited to kind of actually make this a reality, this idea. We have a $5 million budget that was supported by the Congressman's office. And we are working right now on our lease agreement. We've kind of gotten our preliminary estimates, and once we get through our lease agreement with the New Orleans Building Corporation and the city, we'll start moving on to design and construction. And those are the big highlights.
I want to ask you all to get us a physical copy so I can share with council members. And sometimes we go to meetings and we want to share with them and pass it around. So just be sure to get us one too. Okay.
So,
A few questions. The Canal Street Terminal, very nice. Would there be any vending opportunities for local vendors at the Canal Street? I know there's some food trucks by the quorum next door, but like in the terminal or near it?
So we actually did a procurement for concessions. I think it was because the building wasn't done, we didn't get a lot of bite, but now that it's been opened, we are going to pursue that option. But we also realized we kind of want to sit in the space a little bit to kind of figure out how it moves, what are rider patterns, especially as we like getting through a couple seasons. What does it look like? So we can really help the vendors or interested vendors have a better sense of the demand. But it absolutely, we're hoping, the way it's been hitting me in the head with this, we want to make sure that all of our facilities generate some revenue. As you know, we're not funded at the state level, so we need to take every opportunity to help pay for our services and the operations of these buildings. Air conditioning and all the things are new for us.
Right, that's very important, right? Especially right now, the air conditioning. When you say the procurement process, are you purposely, well, I'm gonna ask this instead. Can you purposely try to get some local smaller vendors to come in and be a part of that process who may not be familiar with the procurement process, who can't navigate that process?
Yeah, we have a mix of strategies around that. I don't think there's one size fits all, but we try to do a lot of different things. We have a fantastic supplier diversity office as part of our procurement team, who's actively participating in all the DBE events and setting up their own in terms of training and how do you get involved and how do you get registered, how do you take your business to the next level. So they're really involved in the small business and DBE particular focus around getting folks to be able to participate and find those pathways to entry. We also we have very high participation requirements, right? Our agency average is 32%, 35% overall. And I think that's where we're at last year. And we're on target to hit that this year. So we always put very high requirements for teams. And then we also do that in the procurement process. We also look for, as terms of our selection criteria, in terms of what kinds of mix that you're able to provide. And making sure that we can say that it's not just checking the box, that we're including small and local and DBE businesses as well as a big part of it. So typically small businesses are a way that are going to very much skew towards local businesses. You don't typically get small businesses from outside the region. And then we also, we have these, we set up some on-call pools of design teams particularly for our architecture and engineering projects, including the Algiers and terminal project I mentioned and a few others. We utilize this pool and we constructed that pool in what we think might become a national model, where the DBEs are the primes. And so typically when you put on big projects, particularly, construction, but even in the design world, the DBEs are the subcontractors. And so they kind of have to take whatever the big engineering firm gives them, right? And this, we flipped it on its head and we said, we made all the primes of this on-call are the DBEs. And that way they get to help better determine the work and make sure that they get the portion of work that they know they can do. But oftentimes because they're a subconsultant, they don't get to determine that scope of work. And so we're really excited about that. We think that's going to have a lot of success for the work that we're pumping out, particularly in the design side. And again, I think that's a model that we hope to expand and replicate throughout.
All right, and two more questions. You mentioned the second floor of the Algiers terminal. That'll be office. Was it office space or administration?
That's right. Yeah, I think the short story is we are extremely packed like sardines in our mid-city location, and so we're looking for. That's why the Union Passenger Terminal is to help with our administrative space. But also we're looking for co-location. So this is really to support the ferry operations team. The folks that are really running the ferry operations will be housed in that upper floor. It's extremely high vaulted ceilings. And so it's really kind of not too big a space. You'll still have probably 12, 15 foot ceilings for that main floor. But carving out that nice little second floor, we can put our ferry operations to manage it right there on site.
And the last question / comment, when you do the meeting about the terminal, the redesign and Algiers, I want to work with your team to make sure that we get some good representation from all of Algiers there. You've put it in certain neighborhoods or certain areas. It really you only get a handful. So let's work together to make sure we get the right time and location and make sure we hear from everybody.
Absolutely.
As many people as possible.
Thank you.
Councilmember Harris.
Thank you. I know we're talking about capital projects and I'm excited about the ones especially coming into District B. But I ask y'all this all the time about bus stations. You know, it's school season. We see the kids who are standing out in the heat, uncovered, or in the rain, uncovered. So what is the plan for increasing the number of bus station stops, shelters around the city?
Yeah, great question. So we have a multi-pronged approach around that. So one, we do have a standing program that we're doing every year. We're funding a certain amount of shelters. I think this year's package is 25 that's underway right now. You know, that is a drop in the, well, I shouldn't say a drop, but it's not, you know, we have a lot more to go, but it is a steady program that we're hoping to ramp up as we have additional funds available. Again, big part of the challenge that we have is that a lot of the sites require site work, right? We have to make them ADA accessible. We have to make sure there's enough space. So we kind of run out of most of the easy places to drop shelters where the site is already ready to go. So that's kind of ramps up the cost. And that's why we can't do as much, and we have to do, there's a lot more engineering has to get involved essentially, right? Again, we just can't drop do an installation. So that's kind of what makes the biggest challenge and slows down the program and ups the cost as we move over time. But so this is how we're moving along steadily. We also are going to be making some big improvements. One of the other projects we have an earlier award on is to improve passenger facilities, the smaller ones, not the, you know, we have our downtown transit centers, our flagship, but to really make improvements on these smaller facilities and to redesign what our standard shelter looks like. One of the other big challenges we have in New Orleans is, you know, our friends at Public Works will tell you is we have a lot of constrained environments, right? So it's not this big 10-foot wide, you know, perfect sidewalk. Sometimes we have very narrow, we've got utilities, we're next to businesses, right? And how do we still provide those needed comfort amenities when we have these other kind of constrained conditions or other issues? So one of the big takeaways out of that project will be a new universal shelter design, something that we're really excited. It's really aesthetically pleasing, easy for us to maintain, but also able to deploy in a lot more locations. So that's another big component out of that. And we're going to be using that to deploy that in a lot of the busiest areas, busy transfer areas where we know a lot of people are waiting.
Yeah, I mean, some other cities that are comparable to New Orleans have wired shelters where people, as they're waiting, can plug in phones to charge them. Is there any thought to doing that with these standard shelters that are being deployed?
Definitely, there is. I think our biggest concern is making sure we can design this in the way that our solar panels don't become, you know, high theft items.
Yeah, and we know where those go.
That's
All right, thank you.
Council Vice President Moreno.
Thank you. Good afternoon. What's the latest with the planning for the free youth fair pilot program?
Yeah, so we met with the ride, might have been 6 weeks, a while ago. So we had a great conversation about really what they need because they wanted, in addition to providing the passes to youth. And when I say youth, I mean under 18 and under unattached youth from 18 to 24.
Right.
Really the need to track them. So we were thinking that the paper ticket probably won't work, even though at that time, that's what we had capacity for. Since then, because our La Pass app is in a state of continuous improvement, we've been working with our vendor, which is something that was part of our business plan all along, to be able to sell bulk passes through QR code. So we're hoping that as that's going to be starting to be finalized now, that this is a module that we can apply to the youth pass program.
Great.
So for example, if a convention were coming and they want to sell passes to everyone at the AMA, which is something we really want because people ride the streetcar, we could give them a QR code for all of the conference attendees. We would do the same thing for the youth.
Oh, got
We
it.
would just partner with the city, whatever department comes up with, the focus group comes up with, so they kind of manage giving out the QR code or the coupon code. But we think that's probably the best path forward to kind of get RIDE and the city what they need so they can track progress and figure out who is buying them and how often they're using them, because it'll all be digitally tracked. So we're hopeful that we can get something done sooner than later.
Okay, thank you.
And just to follow up, Councilmember Harris is saying about the shelters. There are a few shelters few bus stops, and I believe I got an answer, but I'm not sure in the past. There are a few bus stops specifically on Odeon that has no bench or nowhere to sit. There's no covers. There's nothing. And also on General de Gaulle, across from Chase Bank, I don't know this intersecting street, but there's no shelter, there's no bench, there's nothing. So when it rains, of course, or like right now when it's 100 degrees, you got groceries or a book sack, and you just got to stand out there and bake. So you give me an answer for that. That'd be great.
Where in General Gall was that? You're saying?
I believe that's Park Fontaine, the intersecting street, across from Chase Bank on the Gall. Thank you. Thank you all very much. I appreciate the fact that you listen to the public on the issue of, for example, the extension of the bus line on Congress and Pontchartrain Park. I mean, we get those calls, and I'm pleased that we can forward them and say that there will be somebody who hears your concerns. And so it was a kind of a relatively modest change to make, but makes a lot of difference, and for a variety of reasons, as the Pontchartrain Park community grows and as some of the elderly folks, are not able to access using their own vehicles. So thank you very much for that. You all work well with the Department of Public Works. So I'm going to put in a little Department of Public Works notice. That means that it's going to be going on Haynes Boulevard. Haynes is challenged right now, okay? I see Sarah's shaking, Ms. Porteous is shaking her head, so she understands that. But if there are no online comments, there are online comments. Okay, we'll take online comments at this time.
This first one is from Brad Ott. He says, thank you to the Transportation Committee for providing the public an update on current and needed upgrades to our public transportation system, especially with the rising cost of living and shifts of our lowering income population from more centrally located neighborhoods to outlying suburban areas of our parish and city. It's vitally important to uphold transportation equity and access for our residents, workers, and visitors. I'm especially interested in learning of the progress of the RTA's bus rapid transit initiative to and from Algiers and Eastern New Orleans, in particular due to frequent traffic jams on the Crescent City connection, as well as observed solo motoring in the HAV lanes on our only Mississippi River Bridge. It's vital that we progress toward making available the HAV lanes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in a two-way direction for truly vetted high occupancy vehicles, including public and school buses, private vehicles that can meet honestly the HAV designation, and emergency responders needing to cross the river. Having experienced frequent private car repairs this summer, I have stepped up my RTA bus usage and have become more intimately aware of the transportation inequity faced by our residents and workers lacking regular access to private motor vehicles. And the next comment is from Lorraine Washington, who says the new links redesign implemented in September 2022 has failed riders living in Orleans Parish. Our commute times are longer, and service for riders living in Orleans Parish has been in a continued downward spiral since the implementation of new links. We need the RTA to reinstate the design that was in service prior to new links. Also, we need the very old buses to be replaced ASAP, and the replacement of the numerous bus shelters and seats at bus shelters that were removed in New Orleans East more than a year ago. And that's it for the online comment.
Thank you very much. One of those online commenters was Mr. Ott, and he's probably watching. I want to thank Mr. Brad Ott for his community interest. And also, I just want to encourage him to encourage others to recognize that the RTA presents at each of these transportation committee meetings and also has a monthly meeting. So it's an opportunity for the public to have input as to what is going to be happening before it even happens. So, but if there are no other comments from council members, thank you very much for your presentation and your work. Our next presenter is Ms. Jennifer Ruley, Engineer, Department of Public Works Mobility and Safety Program Lead. She'll give us an update and an overview.
You're ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today on an aspect of accessibility. I'm Jennifer Ruley, and I manage the Mobility and Safety Division within the Public Works Department. We have been working on kind of guiding our department through accessibility requirements. And I wanted to share with you today some of the progress we've made in tracking progress toward making New Orleans more accessible. And I met Councilmember Moreno, I think a couple of months ago, and we discussed some of the work and how we approach it around accessibility. And in that discussion, we mentioned that we have a public facing dashboard that is used both internally by Public Works as well as by the public and seeing what that progress looks like. And so
And let me stop you for one quick
Yeah.
second so that we can put a little bit more context into this. So a couple months ago, I think myself and Councilmember Harris are the only council members who've done this so far, but Mark Raymond with the Split Second Foundation, he actually has a really interesting campaign, and I know he's going to talk about that in a little bit, where he has ambulatory people get into a wheelchair and try to navigate around the city. And so I had to navigate around areas around City Hall through, also in City Hall. And I can tell you it was difficult navigating through this building, and it was certainly difficult navigating around some areas of downtown. I had to get a push a couple times, as you know, Mark, thank you that your mother was with us so that she could push me every once in a while. But with that, you know, I had promised Mark that I really wanted to take a look at mobility issues within the city, as did Councilmember Harris. And so reached out to Sarah, who got us all together, Ms. Porteous, excuse me, with DPW, who got us all together. And that's when you started to tell me about current initiatives, future initiatives, and this dashboard, which gets us to where we are today. And thank you, Chairman Green, for putting this on the agenda.
Yeah, so without further ado, I'm going to jump into the presentation. I'll make it short. So I'm going to be focused on the dashboard specifically today. And if there's a desire to speak more generally about accessibility issues, I think that might be a separate presentation, because accessibility is a big issue. It's a big comprehensive issue, and a lot of people work on these issues. I'm just talking about one aspect. So if we can go to the next slide. Oh, I'm progressing. Okay, no problem. Perfect. All right, so I'm going to go over the purpose of the accessibility dashboard, a little bit of background on sort of the regulatory framework and how that affects the work we do here in New Orleans. I'm also going to be talking through what are the features of the accessibility dashboard, how do you navigate it, and then future additions to the accessibility dashboard. This is a relatively new tool that we're using, and so we're essentially building it out as we see needs change. So first of all, the purpose of this dashboard, and it's an online dashboard, is as a companion to the city's Americans with Disabilities Act transition plan for public rights of way. So the public rights of way document is what Public Works uses to guide decision-making around accessibility needs and upgrades. And it does not deal with things like buildings, for example. That's a whole other transition plan. So it tracks the physical features of streets and sidewalks that support accessibility. It also provides analytical visualizations of progress at various different scales. And then it allows us to overlap other types of data layers, including things like 311 requests for things like curb ramps, funded construction projects, and then citywide priority areas. So just to give you a little bit of background, accessibility requirements go back over 50 years to the 1973 Rehabilitation Act. That particular legislation affects any kind of federal programs and federal projects. The Americans with Disabilities Act came into effect in 1990, so we're talking about 30 plus years ago, and it was more specific to the accessibility requirements for programs and projects. So it's a very big piece of legislation, and part of it is dealing with the public right of way and how people are able to access pedestrian facilities. So the public rights of way accessibility guidelines were first published in 2011. So you can see from 1990 to 2011, there really wasn't a standard set of guidance. And so there are a number of different attempts that jurisdictions made to make sidewalks accessible. You can see those elements, those remnants of ramps around City Hall and around the city. But by 2011, the guidance was settling into a standard set of requirements. And so the requirements for the guidelines is that all state and local governments have to assess their existing programs, their policies, their facilities to determine what are the needs and to schedule those changes to make these facilities accessible. So there are scoping and technical requirements, and it also states how those requirements apply to things like alterations and additions and new construction. The guidelines will be mandatory, so they become basically a standard when they're adopted by the Department of Justice. And we just received word of the final rule having been published this month. So that means that the standardization of these guidelines is imminent. So following the 2011 PROAG is the Department of Public Works published its first transition plan for public rights of way, so streets and sidewalks. We've done updates to this plan in 2018, 2022, and then more recently in 2023. And the types of updates include things like evaluating our policies and procedures around how we address accessibility of these facilities, standards and specifications. Also, are our city staff and contractors getting adequate training, and then tracking our progress toward compliance. And then our digital accessibility dashboard, which I'm going to show you, was published in last year. So what are the kind of features that you can find on this accessibility dashboard? We focus on things like ramps between the streets and sidewalks. I'm showing some images here just to give you a visualization of some of the things that we're tracking. Also adequate widths of sidewalks, things like audible and vibrotactile pedestrian signals, detectable warning panels, which Councilmember Moreno, we had a discussion about what those are. That's the little bumps on the bottom of the curb ramp that you can see in this picture. Those are intended for people with visual disabilities to be able to know where the edge of where a curb would normally be. So they're entering into the street. Designated accessible parking, bus stops, and then smooth uninterrupted sidewalks. So I would just say that the sidewalk component to this is coming along. That's a lot of data that we're trying to add into this dashboard. And we're very excited to see the sidewalk accessibility features be added once we're able to upload all the data. So navigating, how do you get to accessibility dashboard? So you can access it through the City of New Orleans Department of Public Works website or from the homepage. So what I'm showing here is you can go to the NOLA.gov, and then on that homepage, there is a section called Data, Maps, and Apps at the top. You can click on that and look for the accessibility dashboard. You can also go through the Public Works website, which is what I'm showing here, the screenshot. So it's NOLA.gov/GPW, and look under programs, you'll find a whole section on accessibility in New Orleans. So this goes into details, like I was saying about, comprehensively, how do we address accessibility? How do you make requests for accessibility improvements? There's a link to the accessibility dashboard, and then there's a link to our transition plan, which guides all of our decision-making around accessibility. The accessibility dashboard interface is shown on the image on the lower right hand of the screen, and I'm going to go into some of those details now. So navigating the accessibility dashboard, it's set up in such a way as there's a lot of information in here, but there are 4 main panels. On the left is a filter panel where you can filter different layers of information so that, depending on what you're looking for, you can look through. I'm going to go through some of that and explain what that means. At the top is the map panel, which a lot of people will, you find very useful. It's the primary component of this dashboard that allows you to look across the city, across the neighborhood, or at the block level. At the bottom is an analytics panel that basically gives you a snapshot of compliance, what percentage of intersections are compliant versus non-compliant. It also gives you some bus stop metrics and that sort of thing. And then the legend panel is to the right, and we have a red, yellow, green system right now. And the red is non-compliant, yellow partially compliant, and green is fully compliant. So looking at that, what I'm showing here in this image is citywide overview of compliance. So if you look at the bottom analytics, you can see that we're showing a breakdown of the intersection compliance across the city. And what that shows, it's a little hard to read, but it's showing that across the city, we have about 30% of our intersections are compliant, 20% are partially compliant, and 44% are non-compliant. And the panel to the right shows bus stops. So we use data that RTA collected in 2015 to say, what is the compliance of individual bus stops? And basically that showed in 2015, we had 21% of bus stops that were compliant. I will tell you that we are working with RTA. RTA has some inspections that they're doing to their bus stops. We're going to be updating this information, and that will be added into the dashboard. So now zooming in.
Julie,
I'm sorry.
Can you back up?
Yes.
You said 20% of the sidewalks or bus stops. What was that again?
The statistic from 2015, and that is shown in this panel, is 21% of bus stops are fully compliant.
So with that, and then
Accessible.
so that means 70% are not fully compliant.
Or they have various levels of compliance. Yes.
Yeah. So can you talk about more how you're working with RTA to make that 20% get higher?
Yes. So we're tracking bus stops specifically because they are a facility within the public right of way, but the city doesn't have full authority over those bus stops because obviously RTA is the one who usually is installing those bus stops. However, we are aware that bus stops came into existence, of course, just like streets and sidewalks at various different times in history, and don't have all the modern standards for compliance. And so we're working to address, what are the, where are our priorities for addressing, incorporating accessibility improvements into existing roadway projects, for example. If we're going to be doing construction in an area, then we may be able to address bus stops in the area. In other cases, there may be situations where there are bus stops, you know, beyond existing projects, and then we'll have to identify a specific project to address those. I will tell you that this is very important to us right now because we're under a timeline by 2030 when we're supposed to have 100% compliance on our bus stops. And that is due to a settlement agreement.
So what is an example of a bus stop that's not compliant? I can't picture it.
The bus stop that is not compliant, for example, you know, won't have access to a sidewalk, or there won't be a sidewalk. There won't be a boarding area, for example, a paved boarding area for users of the bus stop. So imagine just having a sign and no other infrastructure, that would be a non-compliant example.
And last question, whose responsibility is that? Is that on the city or on RTA to make these stops ADA accessible?
So I'm not a legal expert, but we are taking joint responsibility for coordinating those improvements at this point.
All right, thank you.
So in the accessibility dashboard, you can toggle layers on and off depending on the kind of information you're looking for. So I'm showing on the top right corner that I'm able to use a drop-down panel to turn layers on and off. So that could be, I could turn intersections on or off, bus stops on and off, and there's a bunch of other layers there. The analytical panel at the bottom changes to reflect the data in the window. So as you zoom in, the data, the analytics will be broken down for exactly what you're viewing. Okay, so just be aware of that.
Council Chair, I have a question. I'm going to interrupt here.
Okay.
I actually just navigated using my phone to the accessibility dashboard. And one of the things that Mark and I discussed when we did Roll With Me is that you have to plan out your route in order to figure out what's accessible and what's not. A lot of people don't have computers anymore, and using the mobile phone, you don't get a full view of the dashboard. So are y'all going to make this mobile friendly in the future?
That's a good suggestion. I mean, I've had a similar conversation about that. You know, as I said, this dashboard was developed for a number of different users. We didn't really intend it originally as a navigational tool for users in real time. So we can take that under consideration to see where that might be possible or how we could make it more useful.
Yeah, I mean, given the fact that this is a tourist city and tourists don't often travel with laptops as they're trying to navigate the city, it would be important that this is mobile friendly so that people who are using it in real time understand where bus stops are accessible, where sidewalks are inaccessible, and how they're going to navigate their way through the city. It's critically important, I think, as we move forward with this. And if y'all need funding to make it mobile accessible, y'all can come to us and ask for that. And it's something I think that we would all get on board to prioritize.
Yeah, and I think that there's an opportunity to speak with people, users of apps right now. So like people who navigate through the city and have disabilities often rely on certain apps already, is to understand how we can interface with those apps. That might be another way of getting to providing a user-friendly interface. So I appreciate that input. And we will definitely consider like ways that we can improve upon the accessibility of the information. So let's see here. In the dashboard, you can also search by neighborhood. So what I've done here is shown you an example of where I've used a filter tool on the left side to show only mid-city. So I'm showing only mid-city, and the data is showing me the dots on the map are the intersection compliance. So green are compliant, red are non-compliant, yellow are partially compliant. And this tells you the snapshot for mid-city, so that the 387 intersections are total intersections in mid-city. And then it gives you the breakdown for compliance and bus stops. So there's a lot of information here. You can actually click on the individual dots on the map and find out more information about like the individual intersection ID as well as bus stop IDs. So in here, I've filtered again on this next slide to show you compliant intersections, so only the green. So you can see the total number of compliant intersections as 90, and then it also gives you exact locations for those. In this next example, we were just talking about bus stops and bus stop compliance. I've asked for where the routes run and what the compliance is of the bus stop. So you can see that I've clicked on a particular location that shows a bus stop at South Carrollton and Banks. It's showing this as I believe it's showing it as a fully compliant bus stop. And from there, you can determine, what is the proximity to a certain my house or that kind of thing. So it's layering in all of those kind of navigational aspects of the neighborhood into the map. And then in the next slide, I'm also showing you can filter by roadwork projects, for example. So we have all of our roadwork, all the stuff that you see on roadwork NOLA, you can see in this map and see the construction status and then the overlaps with particular intersections. So in this case, you can see that there are 147 intersections that overlap with this is RR 124. This is Mid-City Group A. This project was just completed. And right now we're processing the accessibility upgrades. So there's a process of 4 to 6 week process that we go through on the tail end of projects once they complete to update all of the compliance data. So we anticipate these yellow and red dots, a lot of those will go green, and we will be making that update shortly, probably in the next few days. So this is a way that I think from the public's perspective, they can see what is the actual impact of all this construction going on around in my neighborhood. This is only one project. Of course, we know there are multiple projects within Mid-City. And I just want to say as a caveat is that just because there is roadway construction footprint that, just because the footprint overlaps accessibility needs, doesn't always mean that that particular project is going to take care of those accessibility upgrades. Sometimes it takes care of a portion of them, not all of them. So we know that there are potential for gaps that need to be addressed later. So I just wanted to add that caveat, and that the best way to find out if accessibility upgrades are included in a project is to contact Roadwork NOLA, and they can give you more specific details on that particular project. And then I want to also show, this might be helpful for people who are looking for accessible parking zones. We have designated parking zones around the city that have signage that designate for accessible hang tags. And so we are showing the requests that we've received since 2019. You can go into the block level and see where that location is. That location is available to anyone with a hang tag. It's not personalized to a particular person. It's anyone with a hang tag or a plate. So future additions, there are a number of them. The most important one will be the sidewalk compliance. Exactly what is the condition of sidewalks in my neighborhood, and where are the issues? So once I do have a curb ramp, I need to be able to navigate down the sidewalk. And sidewalk compliance is one of those things that it sounds easier than it really is to assess all of the sidewalks in the city. That's why we're relying on some digital data that's going to give us a really better idea about compliance once we sync it up with our dashboard. Also, accessible pedestrian signal locations. Right now, we're just showing those that are under construction. We will be adding in all of the accessible pedestrian signals that exist in the city. And I can tell you that we're working very hard to grow that inventory. And then we will also be looking to add graphs that show compliance over time. So you can take a snapshot in time and say, show me the progress that's been made between year 1 and year 2 and year 3. And then we're also working on integrating our asset management system, which is in the procurement process right now with this system, so that they're working very much together, and we're not setting up independent systems that don't talk to each other. So there's a lot of growth potential for the dashboard, but the fundamental reason for the dashboard is to help us internally in making decisions, and then for the public to be able to see what progress is being made, citywide. And with that, I believe that's my last slide.
I thank you very much for the detail of your presentation, and I also want to encourage the public to recognize the accessibility dashboard at nola.gov/DPW or nola.gov, data, maps, and apps. I just want to encourage the public to, as you watch this meeting, go and take a look right now, and you may have some suggestions based on what you see, and you know that we're open to those suggestions. A lot of people don't know that these tools exist, and that's the benefit of having this sort of meeting. And the benefit of your presentation is that I know a lot of people are going to go away knowing something that they didn't know before. So thank you very much for the detail.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I just want to add, so we have since last year, from 2022 until August of this year, we've seen a 9% increase in our accessible intersections in the city. And that's primarily due to the sheer volume of road construction going on in the city of New Orleans. So a lot of completed projects have resulted in increased accessibility. So that's where this tool comes in handy. We get to see that progress and actually see the needle move. And then I would also say that I wanted to thank the people who are working on this, who work on this tool every day. John DeFreitas, Josh Exler, and Virginia Brisley in the Department of Public Works is a lot of people who've put time and effort, and we're always trying to perfect it even more. And we're hoping that this leads to even better project coordination and funding to address gaps, et cetera.
We're appreciative for their work. Those are names that you don't hear much, people who are just getting the job done. But very important tool, this accessibility dashboard. And as I go throughout certain areas of my district, Gentilly, Buscoville subdivision, for example, it's good to see the road construction being finished, the accessibility construction being finished, but it's also nice to be able to find it on the dashboard. So it's great work. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I actually have some questions. And I'm glad that Ms. Porteous is here. I can tell you that, again, rolling with Mark, that there were beautiful sidewalks that were on Aretha Castle Haley, but then you go off the sidewalk or get a push off the sidewalk, but it's too steep and you're rolling too quickly into a road that is pockmarked and pitted. And so you can't access to get across the road without difficulty. So again, as we're talking about accessibility in the city, I don't think it's just sidewalks. We really need to concentrate on the state of the streets and the transitions between the sidewalks to make sure that they are truly accessible. The second thing I want to say is this. Again, we had some great road work in Central City. I know we're going to celebrate it tomorrow. However, beautiful sidewalks were put into place, but there were no transitions between the sidewalk and the road. There was no asphalt. So you couldn't actually use those sidewalks. My question for you is, once everything is completed, does your team actually go and physically inspect the sidewalks to see if they are navigable? And if not, is that something that you're going to do in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as you know, we have people all over the city working on these projects. And so we rely on the designated project team to properly document the completion of the work. And so sometimes we'll actually get a call and to assist and answer questions, or be the subject matter expert on particular issues. I just got one yesterday, so I just every day it's something new, but what we are trying to do is ensure that we have a thorough documentation process and that it's consistent across all the projects. So, and that is a part of this asset management system is to ensure that we have, you know, that there's an expectation as to the level of documentation that you will have to provide with a project. And that includes photography, like photos of the locations, and then a QA/QC review. So it's a great point where we're looking to make sure that we don't leave a project in a situation, leave gaps, you know, and as and that we address them before we leave the project.
Yeah, and if someone experiences an inaccessible sidewalk intersection, should they call 311? Should they reach out to roadwork? Should they do both? What is the process?
I would say that the both, what I would start with 311, get a tracking number, contact roadwork to say this has been reported. And if it's roadwork, will be able to determine if it is part of an existing project, you know, or if you see a construction going on. 311 is if you don't see any construction going on, then it puts it in a queue to be addressed at a date when we can address it. I would also say if you're using the dashboard and you're going through the dashboard and you see something that doesn't look right, if you know you see that it's showing a compliant curb ramp in front of your house, but it's not, there is a way for you to report that to us, and it's on the landing page of the dashboard. So it's a way that you can report directly to the people behind the system to say this is incorrect, need to check this. And then, as I mentioned, with the bus stops, there is a whole inspection phase that we're going through with the Regional Transit Authority to inspect bus stops and make sure that we have an accurate portrayal of the compliance needs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Any online comments? Thank you very much, Ms. Rulli, for your presentation.
No problem. Thank you very much.
I'm pleased to invite to join us Mr. Mark Raymond Jr. He's the Chief Executive Officer and founder of the Split Second Foundation. The Split Second Foundation, I guess, unofficially announced yesterday that you're going to have a new headquarters here. And we're glad that it's going to be in the city of New Orleans, Mr. Raymond. Thank you. Mr. Raymond is also the chair of the Regional Transit Authority Board of Directors. Plus, he's a proud resident of District D.
Yes, I am. Good morning. I also have with me my counterpart, Dr. Mary Delahousse, who's going to help with our presentation today. Mary, you can sit down. All right, good morning. Thank you so much, council members, for having us today to talk about the accessibility issues. I also want to thank everybody in the city of New Orleans that is working to make a lot of these accessibility issues paramount. And I also want to acknowledge Councilmember Helena Moreno and Councilwoman Harris for participating in the role with me. Councilman Green, we
I'm just ready to call me.
we come in.
I'm ready.
Same for you, Councilman King.
I'm waiting on the call like Councilman Green. Right, just ready.
We're gonna set that up before we leave today, I promise. Okay. But I really came today to have a conversation with you all about the issues that we've seen, and then talk about some of the solutions that I think we're gonna be requesting as time goes on. But to start, my organization, Split Second Foundation, has been working to break down physical, societal, and research barriers for people with disabilities. We've done that through our programs, providing a safe fitness environment for people post rehabilitation. And now you've all seen a lot of the advocacy work that we're doing to enhance the awareness around the accessibility challenges, but also advocating to our elected officials like you all to bring awareness to all of the issues. You can go to the next slide. So just to give you a bird's eye view of the disability picture in the state of Louisiana, 34% of adults in Louisiana have some type of disability, which is higher than the national average of 27%. Of that, you'll see the breakdown here of any disability at 34%, but cognitive being the highest at 17.3%, followed by mobility challenged at 16.2%, which is in the state. So that's anybody with some type of ambulatory disability, which means they require a mobility device to move around, whether that's a wheelchair, crutches, a prosthetic leg, or they might have knee problems or hip problems that have been noted. And doctors have made a note that this is a long-term onset of disability. Next slide, please. We started the Roll With Me campaign specifically to raise awareness around all of the accessibility challenges, both for residents and visitors of our city. The bigger challenges exist, as we know, in our built environment. New Orleans is a 400-year-old city, right? So it's older than the country. That comes with some inherent infrastructure challenges, as we have been trying to address for a number of years now. But I don't think that the accessibility challenges have ever been brought to the forefront as they are being now. And so the Roll With Me campaign sought to really raise awareness and foster this level of dialogue, bringing people together so that we can drive change and also empower the disabled community, because I think there's an overall sentiment that once people are disabled, that they're not really thought about, they're not cared about, that they shouldn't live a life that is meaningful and have the highest quality of life possible. And all of the work that we have sought to do is really to change that, to change the perception around disability, to change how people with disabilities are interacted with, and quite frankly, how people view disability, because anybody's life can change in a split second. Next slide, please. I'm going to let Dr. Delahousse talk about transportation's impact on overall health.
Hi, everyone. So this slide is really just to point out that transportation is a thread through all of the social determinants of health. So when we think of social determinants of health, we're thinking about access to healthcare facilities. We're talking about access to education. Social determinants of health are those non-biological factors. So transportation to our community events, to our social events, all of that is included in our overall health. So if we can strengthen transportation and make it more accessible for everyone, we can also increase access to their own health. The CDC, or the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, so CMS, recognizes that transportation is a potential factor where community level intervention really can make a difference for their residents' health. So we have CMS kind of guiding us towards putting importance and impact and funding on transportation. Less access to transportation shows less health outcomes, especially when you're talking about things like weekly appointments, as I have listed here, or rehabilitation and recovery after injury. And then lack of transportation, as we know from recent research after COVID-19, with the social isolation, that can impact levels of anxiety and depression. And that's also something that is really difficult for vulnerable populations, such as people with disabilities.
So let's talk about the state of accessible transportation, both in the public and private sectors. RTA, and speaking as the chairman of RTA as well, we are going to do an accessibility study to understand where all of the challenges are system-wide. But we also know that we have some inherent challenges, like the St. Charles streetcar, which out of 54 streetcars, only 3 of them are ADA compliant. Out of 62 total stops, only 6 of them are compliant. And that is a recent upgrade due to a lawsuit that I'll note took 11 years for us to settle, which quite frankly is too long. And so frequently we see that all of the accessibility improvements that are made in cities are typically stem from lawsuits. But to note that, I also have to acknowledge that there's the inherent challenge for the St. Charles streetcar, which is the width of the streetcar. So when we think about accessibility and the streetcar, a lift has to fold out of the streetcar, then come down safely and have enough run for someone to safely roll off and not roll into traffic. And for the majority of the St. Charles streetcar track, that is not possible without us building another caveat and eliminating some of the street, which would eliminate some parking, and it would be another expensive infrastructure change. And specific to this slide, I just want to talk about the issues that I see. On the private side, there are no wheelchair accessible vehicles for our rideshare companies. So I can't just call an Uber or a Lyft when I leave this building and have a wheelchair accessible vehicle come up. A number of years ago, the legislature actually took away the municipality's ability to regulate how rideshare companies offer those types of services. So this is a legislative issue. There's also only one wheelchair accessible vehicle in the taxi fleet. So that's another huge challenge. There's only one wheelchair accessible rental van company with a very small fleet. So I can't just go to Avis or Lyft as a visitor to our city to rent a wheelchair accessible van. And one thing that we'll note is that there are some shuttle services, but out of them, the rides can be very expensive, and quite frankly, they're often booked. So for our disabled visitors, there have been many comments about just how inaccessible our city is. And then from a customer service perspective, like how they feel like their complaints are never heard. And that deters people from wanting to visit our city. Next slide. We live in a city that's driven on tourism. The disabled traveler in the US spends upward of $58.2 billion per year. We're taking as many trips, if not more, as regular people, but we like to go places where we feel comfortable. When I travel now, I have to call the airport to set up my air reservation. I got to call the hotel to make sure that they have a wheelchair accessible room. And typically when I get to that hotel, my room isn't what I asked for. I have to figure out all of my transportation needs, because again, I can't just fly to these cities and go to Avis and roll in and get a wheelchair accessible van. So I got to find a special company that offers wheelchair accessible vans when I go to these cities. And this is very disheartening for my travel experience. And typically when I'm traveling with my family. So we're talking about 3 or 4 rooms. We actually did a roll with me yesterday with the general manager of Caesars, Samir Moad, and had a brilliant conversation around like, how can we create accessible zones for our disabled tourists so that like everything is laid out for them, right? Once they get into the Caesars zone, you know, all of their front-facing customer service representatives understand the experience. There's clear communication on, you know, all of the activities and different attractions that people can participate in. And he had never thought about it from that perspective of like, once somebody finds a space that they're comfortable in, that's going to be like their home every time that they come. So every time I go to DC, I want to stay in the same place because they get me, they understand my experience, and they welcome me, right? As a city that puts hospitality first, we need to figure out how to do a better job, both on the accommodation side, but specific to this committee, in getting people around. Transportation is the catalyst for making sure that people have the best experience and can do as much as possible in our city, right? Next slide, please. So potential solutions. The rideshare accessibility issue is a legislative issue, something that I've brought up frequently with all of the legislators and our Orleans delegation so that we can figure out what a solution could look like. I can tell you, and Dr. Delahousse, please interrupt me. There are California implemented, what was the name of the file?
The Access Act.
The Access Act, which implemented a 10-cent additional fee on every ride share and created a fund so that the wheelchair accessible vehicle rides could be subsidized. And I think that would be a brilliant solution for opening the door for rideshare accessibility here in our municipality and our state. To address the public transportation issue specific to the St. Charles streetcar, we've consistently been talking and looking at what modern streetcars could look like in our city. And I know this is a nuanced conversation, so I don't have a lot of information about how much it would cost, but I can tell you the city of Philadelphia is in the middle of doing that right now today, implementing modern streetcars, which offer level boarding, right? Which means somebody could just roll straight on and off instead of having to worry about that lift holding in and out of a streetcar. That will have so many benefits for people, not just with mobility challenges, but mothers with strollers. And we see this consistent conversation in the public transportation space around how are we not just thinking about ADA, but designing spaces that are universally designed so that everybody benefits from the usage. And then I'm going to leave it to you after this, but how do we increase the wheelchair accessible vehicle taxi fleet? So I really came here today to have more of a conversation and highlight some of these issues, highlight some of the potential solutions that we're looking at, but to answer any questions that you all have and have a more in-depth conversation.
Well, I certainly appreciate your sharing that information. And also just encourage you to kind of, sometimes you have to let us know what you see. For example, the Accessibility Act, and I'll take a look, the Access Act, I'll take a look at that. But just recognize that we are, very sincere as a council and wanting to have accessibility to all of our citizens. And those are interesting numbers that you brought up. I don't want to put it in any perspective relative to tourists, but I don't care. I'm care about the people who are here. However, that is a reality, and it is something that does put our city to work. So I mean, if there's something that we can do to help in that respect, let me know. Councilman King.
Thank you, Councilman Green, Mr. Raymond. This is an eye-opening presentation. A lot of things never crossed my mind. Like you have to, before you go and travel, call the hotel, call the airport, and not trying to compare our experiences, but when I go to travel, it's having a lot of young children. You got to call the airport, you got to call the hotel, get a crib, like things that the average person doesn't have to think about. So it just made me think like there's so much more that goes into everyday life for somebody who may be in the wheelchair. So this was eye-opening. I appreciate the information, and I'm not sure on a city level. I know you mentioned some state laws have to get passed, but whatever we can do, and I'm sure I speak for everybody, let us know, because you just put yourself in another person's shoes for a second. And I mean, I'm serious about that ride along. We definitely want to do that. Kind of get a different perspective on life and a different appreciation of how you live it. So I want to congratulate you. Thank you for what you're doing with Split Second, and want to get that scheduled. Mr. Knox will get that scheduled. So just thank you for what you're doing for everybody in the city. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I just want to add to, like, these weren't things that I never noticed before my accident. Like you all, Councilwoman Harris, when we did our roll, I told you, like, every block I roll on, now I had to realize that I had to look to the end to make sure I can get down, right? Because a lot of times we would start and it'd be the most frustrating thing ever to get to the end of a block and realize you got to go all the way back to the beginning and roll in the street because there wasn't a curb cut or there was a chunk of sidewalk missing and we couldn't push a manual wheelchair through it. These were experiences that my mom and I learned and my family learned throughout the course of this. So, a lot of the work that we've done with Split Second Foundation was to lend that experience back to people to make their experience more efficient and give them an understanding of all the things that we had learned. But to also talk about like our own hospitality industry. I stayed at the Virgin Hotel recently, brand new hotel, but the 88 rooms weren't functional for me. They checked the boxes, but I couldn't turn around in the room. I couldn't get to the other side of the bed. I couldn't.
If I may, can you just give a quick testimony to just maybe going to a restaurant. I'm sure narrow doors. I know we're not talking about that now, but I'm just curious to know just how life would be. I'm just small like that.
If you saw the role with me with Walt, we left his office on St. Charles, New Orleans and Company's office. I wanted to go get a burger from Houston's, and he had the hardest time trying to open the heavy door that is at Houston's. Right? It's a heavy door for able-bodied people to open, but for somebody in a wheelchair that's trying to navigate that, it just adds additional challenges. Now, from a accessibility consultant perspective, I'm sure hotels like the Virgin checked all the ADA boxes, but were they really intentional about making sure that that property was functional for people with disabilities in a more holistic way? The ADA is 33 years old now, right? It hasn't been substantively updated since its inception. And so there's a lot of nuances that I believe have been left out of that conversation. And we do see that there's a push in the architecture world to be more universally designed and implement universal design principles. But I don't know, and this is where I would lean on you all as a council. Like, how can we push architects, developers, and civic planners to include accessibility consultants on the beginning of projects to make sure that, you know, people with disabilities have a voice at the table as they are designing these spaces? Like, if I had been a part of the Virgin's design team, I would have told them that the ADA rooms that they are designing aren't going to be functional for people with disabilities, not because of the space that they allotted square footage wise, but because of where they put walls and furniture and little things, right? That could have made that experience so much better for people with disabilities. And then training for their front of house staff, right? Like, their front facing concierge and customer service representatives don't even know that the hotel doesn't have a wheelchair accessible or a lift on the pool, or what are the wheelchair features on the hotel rooms that are ADA compliant? How high is the bed, right? Can I move in it? Is there enough room for me to make a full turn in the room? Just little things. And that is where I need to lean on you all as the leaders of our city to figure out how we can push people in the right direction. Let's say that nicely.
Councilmember Harris.
Mark, thank you for being here today. And I can tell you, Councilmember King and Green, the role with me was so enlightening, just on so many levels, including to the point about the doors. You made me go open the door at Ashe, which I did. But, you know, it was difficult. It was difficult to navigate. And it's physically difficult if you're in a push wheelchair. I was sweating by the end of it. And you think about New Orleans being a flat city, but it really isn't when you're differently abled. And not even if you're in a wheelchair, but if you're on a walker, if you have any sort of knee or limb issue. I mean, you know, my mom had hip issues, and just navigating the streets here and having to look down every time you take a step to make sure you don't trip and fall. It's really problematic, and I think we as council can do the very least by pushing our DPW to make sure that when handicap accessible ramps are put in, that they're actually accessible, that striping is appropriate, that wayfinding is appropriate. So again, I pledged to you, and I did then, to make sure that we continue to push them to complete the streets and make everything accessible. I did want to turn to you about this accessibility dashboard that DPW has promoted. Do other cities have anything like this that you use? And would it be, do you use it on a desktop, or would you use a mobile phone, or is there some other way to figure out how to navigate a city like New Orleans?
I've seen them incorporated in transit apps. So it would be really interesting to see RTA's Go Mobile app incorporate that data, because it will route out an entire trip for someone, right? As they're trying to navigate public transportation. But just to know where like those hotspots are, we know this as residents, right? Like which streets and sidewalks I don't want to go down. But for visitors, I would definitely use a mobile app. And when I go out of town, I use the mobile apps. But that's what I was thinking, like, how can we incorporate that into RTA's app so that people can really see, get a better lay of the land as they're, traveling our city.
Almost like the New York City subway map where you can see where the elevators are actually working to get on the subway and what streets are accessible. Listen, again, I think we're all committed to doing what we can on this front, and you let us know because you are the one who has the insight. But certainly that was eye-opening to me, my visit with you, and I think all the time about accessibility and how we can make improvements. So thank you.
Thank you. And I know Dr. Delahousse wanted to add something.
Yeah, and speaking actually, thank you all so much for inviting us and thank you for inviting the accessibility dashboard group that was educational for me. But one of the potential solutions I see, especially coming from your question, which was excellent about how do we know that these issues were resolved? How do we know that this ramp is appropriate? I think inclusion of representation of people who use wheelchairs, who have visual disabilities, who use different mobility devices, including them at the table when we're checking these places off, because no one is going to see the potential issue better than someone who has the lived experience. So that would be one of my potential solutions and recommendations going forward.
Having a seat at the table.
Yeah, and all those different disabilities that we included on that previous slide. So not just wheelchair users.
Right. Visual,
yeah.
hearing impairments.
Yeah, include them in the checkoff list. So
Yeah.
they'll tell you what, if it's.
We almost need an advisory team to make sure that once these projects are completed, and hopefully, knock on wood, they will be completed sooner rather than later, that there's an advisory team of folks who have lived experience who can actually go and use the intersections or the devices that have been installed. Thank you.
I don't know that there's someone on the DPW staff that does that either from an accessibility perspective. So that would be a brilliant person to add to the team.
I wish they were here, but I'll make sure that they understand that they should be watching this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Harris. Thank you, Dr. Delahousse. Thank you, Mr. Raymond, for your presentation today. And I'm just so pleased that this has been such an eye-opening meeting in terms of the accessibility dashboard and your presentation today. And as has been mentioned, kind of let us know what we need to do. We don't ever assume that we know everything. And just what you mentioned today has been eye-opening relative to accessibility. So please know that we're very sincere about wanting to enhance transportation and also to enhance our community being able to, make input relative to what our city needs to do to make it a better city. Thank you very much for your work and commitment.
Thank you, Councilman.
Okay. Madam fellow council member, we don't have a quorum, so technically, we're out of here.